You might think an ancient manual about animal sacrifices and priestly duties is just like a dry, archaic rule book.
Right, yeah. Most people do.
But what if I told you that tucked inside those ancient instructions is basically the secret to the psychology of a perfect apology?
It really is.
Welcome to today's deep dive. May God bless your day and your week as we jump into our material. We are bringing you along on a very specific mission today.
Yes, we are.
We have this really fascinating stack of study notes right here on the table. We're drawing specifically from the Holman and the NAA study Bibles, and we're focusing entirely on one single slice of ancient text.
Just one chapter, really.
Exactly, Leviticus chapter 6.
Which, I mean, let's be honest, is admittedly a section where a lot of readers traditionally just lose their momentum.
Oh, totally, they hit the wall.
Yeah. When you encounter all these detailed manuals regarding, ancient worship logistics and grain offerings, the immediate assumption is that it has zero relevance to modern life.
It sounds like the ancient equivalent of reading a terms of service agreement.
Right, you just want to scroll to the bottom and hit accept.
Exactly. But I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, that assumption is going to be completely turned upside down.
Absolutely.
We are going to discover some genuinely mind-blowing insights about, well, the psychology of human apologies, the absolutely grueling, sweaty logistics of ancient worship, and the literal, physical contagiousness of holiness.
It's heavy stuff, but really practical.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this by starting with something highly relatable. Messing up and having to apologize.
A pretty universal human experience, I'd say.
Sadly, yes.
So the initial section of this chapter, it deals specifically with what's called the guilt offering. And it outlines the exact protocol for what happens when someone commits a deliberate offense against another person in the community.
And the sources we have, they get incredibly specific about the types of offenses. We aren't talking about, like, abstract, victimless crimes here.
No, not at all.
The text lists things like deceiving your neighbor about a deposit they entrusted to you, or lying about a pledge, straight up robbery, extortion, and this one is so specific, finding someone's lost property and then lying about it under oath just to keep it.
Finders keepers, basically.
Exactly. But these are real property crimes. They are deep breaches of communal trust.
They are. And the NAA Study Bible notes, they draw out a really profound theological framework here.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, the text explicitly classifies an offense against a neighbor. So, defrauding them, stealing from them, it classifies that as an unfaithful act against the Lord.
Wow. So they're directly tied.
Exactly. You cannot neatly separate social ethics, how you treat your fellow human, from divine worship. In this ancient mindset, cheating your business partner is literally an act of unfaithfulness to God.
That's a heavy way to look at it.
The horizontal relationship with your neighbor and the vertical relationship with the divine, they're inextricably linked.
Let me push back on how this compares to our modern sensibilities, though. Because the penalty attached to this completely shifts the paradigm of how we view, saying sorry today.
Oh, it really does.
Because the restitution rule is that the offender cannot just, drag an animal to the altar, offer it to God, dust off their hands, and feel spiritually cleansed.
Right. It's not just a transaction with God.
No. Before they even approach the altar to deal with the spiritual side of things, they have to deal with the human victim. They must return the stolen property or the lost item in full.
And that's not even all of it.
Right. Plus a 20% penalty.
Yeah.
A fifth part is just added on top. And that entire sum has to be handed directly to the victim on the exact same day they bring their sacrifice to the priest.
It completely blocks the loophole of seeking cheap grace.
Cheap grace. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot seek spiritual absolution while your pockets are still lined with the physical profits of your deceit.
Think about the psychological weight of that for a second. Today, an apology is often entirely verbal and emotional. We just say, I'm sorry I damaged your property, or I'm sorry I lied.
And we sort of expect the relationship to instantly heal.
Just because the words left our mouths. But this ancient law acts as like a divine late fee.
Yes.
And it's paid directly to the victim, not to the sanctuary. It insists that true repentance requires literal economic repair. It's not just about feeling bad. It's about making the victim more than whole.
What's fascinating here is how this system engineered genuine psychological closure for the entire community.
Closure is so hard to get, too.
It really is. And the Holman Study Bible provides a really illuminating note on the Hebrew word used here for the sin or guilt offering.
Okay, what's the word?
It's chetaf.
Chetef.
Right. And this word signifies not just the sin itself, but the active removal of the penalty and the purification of the relationship.
Huh. So it's an action word, almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By combining a public confession at the altar with literal, sometimes painful economic restitution, the slate was wiped entirely clean.
Because the victim actually benefits from the situation eventually, like they get their stolen sheep back plus extra.
Precisely. The victim is fully compensated plus interest, which minimizes lingering resentment.
Hard to stay mad when you just made a 20% profit.
Exactly. The community sees the restitution happen in broad daylight, and the offender experiences the tangible physical cost of their actions, which satisfies the requirements of justice.
That makes so much sense.
It prevented generational grudges from simmering in the camp. It is a brilliant mechanism for total social and spiritual reset.
But, okay, to facilitate that kind of profound reset, you need serious infrastructure.
Yes, you do.
And that brings us from the economics of the apology to the location where the spiritual transaction actually happens, the altar.
Right, the focal point of all of this.
Transitioning from the crimes of the people, the text moves into the intense, everyday maintenance required by the priests just to keep this whole system running. This brings us to the law of the burnt offering.
And the central unyielding command in this section regards the fire on that altar.
Okay.
The text repeats it for emphasis to ensure there's absolutely no misunderstanding. The fire on the altar must never go out. Never. It has to burn all night until morning, and the priest is required to add fresh wood to it every single morning. It is a perpetual, unending flame.
Which, sounds incredibly poetic and mystical until you think about the actual physical logistics of it.
Right.
We are talking about a nomadic people in the ancient Near East. I keep thinking about this as extreme, holy janitorial work.
That is a very accurate way to describe it.
It's not a magic fire that sustains itself on spiritual energy. Someone has to go out, find that wood, chop that wood, haul that wood back to the camp, and tend that fire at, 3 in the morning.
The sheer physical labor is staggering, especially considering the scarcity of fuel in that desert environment.
I am so glad you brought up the labor, because the part that really stopped me in my tracks was the wardrobe protocol for this labor.
Oh, the clothing changes, yes.
Yeah. The text says the priest has to put on specific custom linen undergarments and a sacred linen tunic just to scoop the ashes off the altar and place them beside it.
Right, just to move them a few feet.
But then, to actually dispose of those ashes, he has to completely strip those sacred clothes off, put on completely different, common everyday clothes, and carry the ashes outside the camp to a designated clean place.
It seems tedious.
Why this elaborate outfit change just to take out the ancient trash?
Well, it comes back to the core concept of reverence, even for the byproduct of worship.
The byproduct,
Yeah.
meaning the ashes.
Yes. The ashes are the physical remainder of a holy interaction. The Holman note elaborates on the continuous nature of this offering, and they bring in the Hebrew concept of the tamid,
Tamid, meaning?
meaning continually or perpetually. That perpetual fire represented God's constant, unbroken presence among the Israelites.
Okay, I'm tracking with you.
Because God's presence does not sleep, the need for unending intercession on behalf of the people never pauses.
Wait, so if the fire is a proxy for God's constant presence, then the priest taking out the ashes is essentially handling the physical residue of the divine.
That is exactly the framework. Because the fire is profoundly sacred. Everything associated with it, even the ash, carries a massive weight of holiness.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The meticulous clothing change is essentially a spiritual containment protocol.
A containment protocol.
Yes. When the priest is at the altar scooping the ash, he must be in a state of high ritual purity, hence the linen garments. But those sacred garments belong exclusively to the sanctuary environment.
Oh, so if he wore them outside the camp to dump the ashes,
Right.
he'd be dragging the holy through the dirt of the mundane world.
He would be mixing the intensely sacred with the casual, everyday life of the camp. Absolute respect is required at every stage.
That is wild.
You don't just reverence the dramatic moment of the sacrifice. You reverence the preparation, the execution, and the unglamorous cleanup.
Right.
The transition between the sacred and the common must be deliberately marked by the changing of clothes.
It forces the human mind to stay engaged.
Exactly.
You literally cannot go on autopilot. Every single movement, even taking out the ashes, is hyper-intentional.
It's all about mindfulness.
So we've got this roaring, perpetual fire that requires a massive amount of labor. The text then outlines what else gets cooked on it, detailing the grain offering.
Right. Moving from meat to grain. This was a bloodless offering. It was typically made of choice, fine flour, olive oil, and frankincense.
The process described is that the priest takes a handful of this flour and oil mixture, along with all the incense, and burns it on the altar as a memorial portion.
A pleasing aroma to the Lord, as the text calls it.
Yeah. But the vast majority of the dough, the leftover flour and oil, is given directly to Aaron and his sons. They have to bake it without yeast, so unleavened, and eat it in a holy place, specifically the courtyard of the tent of meeting.
Right, and this was essentially how the priests were paid and sustained.
Which makes sense. They're working full time.
The priesthood was an all-consuming vocation. Unlike the other Israelite tribes, they were not given tribal lands to farm or graze massive herds.
They didn't have their own resources.
Exactly. The sacrificial system was intentionally designed to provide for their daily physical needs. The community feeds the priesthood through their offerings, and the priesthood intercedes for the community.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Oh, yeah?
In the notes detailing the grain offering, there is a very specific exception to this rule of the priests eating the leftovers.
This part is brilliant.
On the day a priest is anointed, like when he is being ordained and consecrated for service, he has to offer his own grain offering.
Right.
It's a tenth of an ephah of fine flour cooked on a griddle with oil. But unlike the regular grain offerings brought by the common people, the priest is strictly forbidden from eating the leftovers of his own consecration offering.
Not even a crumb.
The text states it must be entirely burned on the altar. He cannot take a single bite.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of institutional design, what we're looking at is a brilliantly crafted anti-corruption mechanism.
It's an ancient conflict of interest clause.
That's exactly what it is. It is entirely about removing perverse incentives.
Okay, unpack that for me.
A priest cannot personally benefit from an offering that is made for his own atonement or his own ordination. Think about the power dynamic at play here. The priests are the ruling religious class.
Right.
If a priest could eat the meat or the grain of his own sin or ordination offering, the potential for abuse is massive.
Oh, I can easily see how that devolves. A corrupt priest could just decide he needs extra purification every time he wants a free, high-quality meal.
Exactly.
He could continually declare himself unclean just to sacrifice a prime cut of beef to the Lord and then essentially eat it for lunch.
It would completely undermine the integrity of the entire sacrificial system. It would turn it into a self-serving culinary exercise.
Just a barbecue for the guys in charge.
Right. By mandating that any offering made for the priest must be totally consumed by the fire, the law removes any potential economic or physical incentive to abuse their power.
That's so smart.
They are sustained by the offerings of the people, which represents their role as dependent servants to the community, but they cannot consume their own sacrifices. It ensures the sacrifice is a genuine, costly act of devotion and surrender to the Lord.
That is just fascinating foresight. The law protects the economic integrity of the system from human greed.
It does.
But the text doesn't stop at economic integrity. It moves directly into protecting the physical integrity of the sacrifices.
Yes.
The rules for handling the meat of the sin offering introduce a concept that is truly, foreign to how we think today.
Very foreign. The sin offering is categorized in the text as most holy.
Most holy.
Because of that supreme level of holiness, the text introduces very strict containment protocols regarding anything that comes into physical contact with it.
While reading this section, I found myself visualizing the priests handling radioactive material.
That's a great analogy.
Not in a dangerous, destructive sci-fi way, but in the sense that they are dealing with this heavy, concentrated, highly volatile element of holiness.
Yes, exactly.
Because the text explicitly says that whatever touches the meat of the sin offering becomes holy itself. If even a single drop of blood from the sacrifice splatters on the priest's garment, he cannot just take that garment home to his tent and wash it with his regular laundry.
No, absolutely not.
He has to wash that specific spot on the garment in a holy place, inside the sanctuary courtyard. The holiness cannot leave the zone.
Your analogy of radiation is incredibly helpful for understanding the ancient Near Eastern conception of holiness.
How so?
Well, modern readers tend to think of holiness purely as a moral or spiritual state, like being a good person, having pure thoughts.
Right, an internal thing.
But this text treats holiness almost as a tangible, physical force. It is literally contagious. It forcefully alters the physical state of everyday objects it touches.
And nowhere is that physical alteration clearer than in what I like to call the Potts protocol.
The Potts protocol, I love that.
The text gives a very strange hypothetical scenario. It says if the meat of the sin offering is boiled in a clay pot, that pot must be broken afterward.
Shattered completely.
It has to be utterly shattered. But if the meat is boiled in a bronze pot, the pot does not have to be broken. It just has to be rigorously scoured and rinsed with water.
Right.
I was trying to wrap my head around why God would care about the cookware. And it all comes down to the physical properties of the materials themselves.
It highlights an acute awareness of material science in the ancient world.
Which is wild for Leviticus.
I know, but think about it. Clay is inherently porous. It breathes.
So if you boil something in clay, the juices, the actual physical essence of the meat, seeps deep into the microscopic walls of the pot.
The clay literally absorbs the holy essence.
Because it has absorbed that supreme holiness deep into its structure, it permanently crosses the boundary from common to sacred.
Yes.
It can never be used again to cook a regular Tuesday night family dinner because you would be mixing the ultimate sacredness of God with mundane daily life.
And that's a huge violation.
So the only way to prevent that clay pot from being profaned by common use is to shatter it completely. But bronze is solid metal. It's not porous.
Right. The holy essence remains strictly on the surface of the bronze. It doesn't penetrate the metal matrix.
Okay, I see.
Therefore, it can be rigorously scrubbed and rinsed off, allowing the bronze pot to return to a neutral, clean state.
It is wild to think about holiness as something that can get trapped in the pores of earthenware.
The biblical commentators lean heavily into this interpretation because it underscores how fiercely the boundary between the sacred and the common was protected. You cannot allow the most holy things to casually bleed out into the mundane world.
Right.
Because, I mean, if everything is holy, nothing is holy. The value of the sacred degrades when it is treated casually. And this absolute, uncompromising protection of the boundary is really reinforced by the final striking rule in the chapter.
The rule about the blood entering the inner tent.
Yes. The text states unequivocally that if the blood of a sin offering is taken inside the actual tent of meeting to make atonement in the inner sanctuary, the meat of that animal cannot be eaten by anyone.
Not even the priests.
Not even the priests who normally rely on it for food. It must be completely, utterly burned in the fire.
There is no room for pragmatism here. You can't say, well, the blood did its job in the tent, but this is a perfectly good cut of meat. Let's just save a little bit for the priests so it doesn't go to waste.
None whatsoever. There are zero exceptions. The theological logic here is that the higher the level of atonement, meaning the closer the blood gets to the immediate, concentrated presence of God in the inner sanctuary, the more absolute the surrender of the animal must be.
It's all or nothing.
Exactly. It cannot revert to being common food for human consumption. The progression of holiness demands a total consuming burning.
It is a stunning, uncompromising vision of reference. Every single detail we've looked at today, from the 20% restitution paid to a neighbor, to the breaking of a porous clay pot, to the sweaty labor of keeping a fire burning at all hours, is meticulously designed to force the human mind to recognize that they are interacting with the divine.
It's truly comprehensive.
So what does this all mean for us today?
That's the big question.
Obviously, you aren't boiling sacrifices in bronze pots or changing your clothes just to take out the ashes from your fireplace. But the underlying psychology, the profound principles behind these texts, they are incredibly challenging.
They really are.
It makes you wonder about the quality of our own actions. When we apologize to someone we've wronged, are we actually repairing the damage with a 20% restitution mindset?
Yeah.
Are we truly seeking to make the other person whole, or are we just looking for quick, cheap forgiveness so we can feel better about ourselves?
It absolutely challenges our modern concept of dedication and convenience. Do we treat our spiritual commitments or even our deep personal relationships with the dedication of that perpetual fire?
That's a great point.
A fire that requires us to wake up in the dark and chop the daily wood of discipline, rather than just passively waiting for spontaneous inspiration or, good feelings to keep the flame alive.
The daily chopping of wood.
Exactly. This raises an important question about where we truly place our value. I'd encourage you to consider the ashes of your own life. Think about the unglamorous, behind-the-scenes maintenance you have to do to keep your relationships healthy, your career moving, or your personal growth alive.
The sweeping up, the taking out the trash, the stuff no one ever claps for.
Exactly that. Often, we only celebrate the burning flame, right? The exciting moments, the big victories, the public successes.
Yeah, of course.
But what if the quiet, mundane act of taking out the ashes, doing the repetitive, uncelebrated work with intentionality and deep respect, has its own profound sacred value that we are completely overlooking?
Wow.
What if reverence is found just as much in the lonely cleanup as it is in the roaring fire?
That is a powerful paradigm shift, the holy janitorial work of life. It completely changes how you view the mundane, everyday tasks we all have to do.
It really does.
Well, that brings us to the end of our time for this deep dive. Thank you for taking this journey and exploring these ancient, surprisingly practical texts with us. God blesses all of you.